And this is a great, you guys are fed. Thanks for cleaning up. We have a tradition here as well that at Uber you have to clean up your own mess. No one cleans it up for you. And if you don't clean up that glass in a conference room, they actually send around a picture sometimes to the whole office and say who left it there. And then you get shamed and then kind of running back and getting it. So it's a good way to keep the place clean and keep building a team. So this is a great thing Young Life is doing. I've been involved with Young Life since I was a high school kid in Colorado. My parents got me involved and I loved it. And so the fact that it's here in Singapore and the fact that you all from various high schools can be a part of this is fabulous. And I think what the Young Life team here has done to put together this leadership program, they kind of, in addition to just Young Life and wildlife and campaigners and all that makes Young Life so special, to be able to do something that gives you a series of both skills and ideas and thoughts and ways of thinking about living your life from a work standpoint, from a life standpoint in this leadership program, I think is just a great idea. So I'm honored and humbled to be the first speaker, but I've got some thoughts that'll make this a lot of fun tonight. I have done a version of this talk in about 30 Uber countries around the world, and I've adapted it tonight for this program. But effectively what you're going to take away tonight, if I do my job right in the next 20 or 25 minutes, are 8 leadership lessons that are key for any kind of strategy, which is the first topic, as Rebecca said, that you're going to be studying to make a strategy successful, whether or not that's in a school project, in a business you may work, your family, life in general. And so we use these at Uber, and I learned them in the Himalayas, which is why I think hopefully this will be something that will keep you all at least somewhat focused on the screen here for this time. It's a bit of a fun presentation. I promise this is not 50 slides. It's about 17 or 18 slides, pretty hard hitting, and I'll set it up and then I'll make 8 quick points, but you'll see, and I think they may even be worth occasionally drawing them in that journal of yours if you would. Okay, let's start here. Uber Everest, there's a reason behind this. That is actually a flag, and when I joined Uber a couple of years ago, I was on my way to the Himalayas to climb a large mountain there known as Mount Everest, and was given this flag with a little bit of pressure to try to take it to the top of the world. So that's where the flag comes in. But I'm going to take you back exactly 5 years ago, this summer, and talk about setting this talk up, because anytime you have a strategy, anytime you learn how to do something, it often starts with something that doesn't go right, or is maybe a bit of a failure, or a tragedy happens, or something that isn't exactly what you expected. And that's what happened to me the first time I went to Mount Everest. This is in the April and May of 2014. This is on the Nepal side of Mount Everest. Some of you all saw the pictures this spring of a bunch of people lined up on the top of Mount Everest. This is the side where that happened. So let me give you a little bit of a quick geography lesson here. That smiley guy is me. That's the first point. I'm not actually that smiley, I'm just completely out of breath. That's at about 20,000 feet above sea level. And I'm on a mountain called Pumori, which is looking back towards Mount Everest, the big one up there with a massive plume coming off. In the middle is Lhotse, and this is Nuptse. So we'll ask a couple of fun questions tonight. I'm taking a geography lesson as well. Lhotse is an 8,000 meter peak, so is Mount Everest. Do you know how many 8,000 meter peaks there are in the world? Anybody know? Kayla, you better get this.
14.
14 it is. Yes, it is. Kayla, by the way, I didn't spoil it. That is one of 2 of my daughters in the audience, so honored to be in. And they've actually not seen this version, so which I'm excited about. Nuptse is just below it. This is Everest Base Camp. You guys have heard a lot about that. And that is the Khumbu Icefall. That's the route that you climb Mount Everest on that side. And that, by the way, is the Nepal-Chinese border. That sets the stage. This is April. It's actually Easter Sunday. That is a great place to be on an Easter Sunday to appreciate what this world and this creation is all about. So a couple days before that, though, life was pretty good. This is me. I'm up here in the red, and we're being filmed. And this is being filmed for the Everest IMAX movie. And you might ask why somebody like me is being in a movie. It's actually only happened once. It happened that day. It'll never happen again. I'm not famous. I just happened to be up there, and the actors who were in that movie, Josh Brolin and Jake Gyllenhaal and others, didn't want to come up to base camp. It's too high. So they had to film a scene of us walking into base camp. So I got the role because I'm so old that I had gear from 1996 that actually was the time the movie was about. So got the role, and I did 16 takes in and out, and I screwed up every one of them. Because we stopped too early, we walked too fast. These guys were all Hollywood cameramen, used to everything. So first and last time. But the point is that we were very confident. That next day we were going to begin to climb the higher parts of the mountain. The guy behind me was on my team, James, super fit. We were the first team on Everest that year. We were the first team to climb one of the practice mountains around. We were the first team to base camp, and we were the first team to have gone through that ice fall I showed you. The day before we're supposed to move up the mountain, we're out screwing around filming movies because we were so confident in how good we were and the fact that everything was going so perfect right there. We're like, we are going to summit this mountain. Everything is going to be perfect. We actually got done filming, went back to our camp, and our coach or our guide said, you know what, we're going to wait one day. Tomorrow's Good Friday. We're going to hang out and relax. It's too early to go up and move up to the camp. Camp's not ready, and we're so far ahead of schedule. Anyway, we want you to sleep in tomorrow morning. We'll go on Saturday morning. So I got up the next morning to do a little devotional, which I was doing every morning, and I always do in the mountains. And I woke up to this, which was kind of a blurry picture for good reason. This was one of the largest avalanches ever to hit Mount Everest, and it hit right. I'm going to go back. I won't do this. I'll do this at once. We were camping here. We hiked up through there before, about 3 days earlier, and this avalanche happened when a big piece of ice up here fell off. It was a 10-story building. We're on the 34th floor. It's about a third of this building of ice fell off, and it fell right here on the route. And so that was a terrible day in the mountains. I don't talk a lot about it. There's some of the presentations I do. I won't with you all, but it was a day where a lot of people lost their lives from the Sherpa community who were in that route, and this happened to fall right on. It was a black swan event. It had never happened before. It had never happened there. It had never happened at that time of day. It was completely something that it was unplanned. And as tragic as that is, and as tragic as it was, and by the way, our climb was over that day. There was no way we were going to climb that mountain. They closed Mount Everest later that week for the whole year, and we all went home. Everything we'd set out to do, we didn't achieve. It was, in the world's eyes, a failure. It was a tragedy, but our original plan did not work out. And that, sadly, in life is the way some things happen. And we've got to react to situations like that with how do you think about kind of coming back and doing something a bit different the next time that may change the way that you could potentially be a little bit more successful the next time. You can't take something like that away. That happens, this sort of thing, and candidly with the way that the glaciers are changing, the mountains are changing, this happens more and more. But it never happened like it did that day. So I came back to Singapore, went back to work, and I thought I was done. I thought I would never go back. But I started thinking with someone else who is a leading mountaineer. His name is Adrian. And we started thinking together. He needed a guinea pig, and I volunteered to be his guinea pig, whether or not you could actually go back to Mount Everest and do it in a different way. Not from the Nepal side, not taking 65 days, which is how long that takes, but to go on the other side, where there's a lot fewer people, and do it in 1/3 of the time. And so I only put this in the last geography lesson. This is the other side of Mount Everest. So when I was standing over there, I was kind of over here looking back up. This is that border that I showed you, and this is the North Face. Some of you may have North Face clothing, and this was the route that was originally tried on the mountain in the 1920s. And it was never climbed until 1953 on the other side, on that Nepal side. So in some ways, this is a new idea, a new way of doing it, but going back to something that had been done or thought about before. So this is what the Chinese side of Mount Everest looks like. Enough of a geography lesson for you. The route itself on that side is up here, like this, into here. There's a camp right here called, this is Camp 2. This is the North Col Camp. And then you go up a ridge here, and the summit is up over the top. You can't actually see it. But there's a very famous couple of steps here, step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's where the first people that attempted this mountain, actually George Mallory, disappeared in 1924. And so when it had first been attempted, it had been this way. So a lot of mystery around this side. And the Chinese eventually did climb it on this side in the 1970s. But that's the route, to give you a sense. But strategy lesson number one for you all, when you think about what you're doing, is that you often have to look at an old problem in a new way. You look at something that you thought about the same way of doing it. At Uber, people thought about getting around towns in taxis or in their own cars for years, since the automobile was invented in some ways. We thought about some other way of doing that, which is to take people's cars that are already owned and putting other people in them. It was a new approach to an old problem. What we were going to do on the other side of Everest was to go much faster. We were going to go in a way that you only went up once and back, which was much safer, so you didn't go up and down the mountain a bunch of times which put you in the way. And on this side, we were going to do it in a way that we always were on a ridge. We were never down below something that was going to fall on us. There are a lot of other problems on this side. It's much colder, it's much more remote, it's much steeper, but it's down, it's on a ridge. So, new approach to an old problem. Now, you can't do that, and the other piece of the new approach was that the technology had changed. And at Uber, we're all about technology. So if you look out the building on the other side of that cafeteria, there is a place called UFIT, and that is my gym. And what people should know is this mask was also a new way of climbing these big mountains. That mask and this technology was actually developed between 2014 and 2017 when I went back in a small machine. The technology was there, but the ability to make it portable was new. And you could take it out to the Chinatown and convince your body that actually you were at 4,000 meters and train in Singapore to be able to go much faster on this mountain. So this is what it looks like to train for a Himalayan peak in Singapore at this elevation. And so training is my second point. Everything you do about a strategy involves training your people, your team, what you do, and training yourself to make sure you're ready to go. And when we were going to do the Everest the new way, much faster, we had to be twice as fit as you were on the other side of the mountain to do it in 65 days. Because we couldn't wait for our bodies to get fit on the mountain. We had to move and move quickly. And so think about training. And that means different things. There's a bunch of athletes in the room. You know exactly what I'm talking about there. You can't show up for the first day of a season and have not thought about training and expect to have your team strategy be successful. You can't think about having any sort of academic after-school program that is ready to go for prime time without people training about a speech or about a debate or whatever it is, a service project. And so I want you to think about, when you are thinking about your strategy and these leadership lessons, what is the training you need to make sure you can be successful? There's a real piece in the third part of the strategy, is you got to make sure you have the right gear, and to make sure that your teams or you have the right gear. Now, the right gear can mean a lot of different things, and I'll talk about what it means as it relates to Mount Everest. But when I think about gear, that could be simply the right materials. You've got a journal today. There are certain times you need the right computer. You need the right supportive. If you're going to be a great photographer, you need the right camera. Whatever it is, you need the right gear. And chances are, you don't need too much of it. You need the right gear and not so much that it becomes overwhelming. That's really a true story about the mountain as well. This is me, back in the picture again. There's not too many slides of me, thankfully. Makes it a much better presentation. This is kind of a different Everest presentation than some of the ones you see. It's a little less rah-rah, a little more lesson. This is a mess. And as actually Kayla may remember, this was about 3.5 or 4 hours before I was supposed to leave the airport to go. So we have a big problem on too much gear and what to prioritize, because everything had to go in 2 bags like this. So you probably don't need like 7 pairs of boots. You don't need, that's all clothes there. And the reality is, when I went to Everest the first time, I took way too much stuff. And yes, there are certain things that are absolutely critical, and without them, you can get in a lot of trouble in the mountains, especially in high mountains like that. The reality is, you actually can make use of things and figure out what is the key thing or the key couple things that you need. Because, and if you're at a startup like Uber, we actually did always have the ability to have everything we wanted. We have to kind of figure out what's the most important thing for our people to have in order to go do their business. Because the world is not a place where you have the ability to have as much crap as we did in the room there, because you need to figure out what is important here. So, sleeping bag, that's important. These pair of boots, you can't stumble without them. There's some rope in here that you would never think of going. Do I need 16 t-shirts? Probably not. And all that medication, never took half of it. So the reality is between 2014 and 2017, I figured this out and took basically a third of the stuff that we did the first time to go back. And the reality is why that's important, and there's a young lady in the audience who may recognize this picture in the front row. That is my daughter Ashley, who in 2014 weighed exactly as much as the amount of gear that I would carry to the summit of Everest if we were going to be able to summit. And that is 1 oxygen bottle, 1 water bottle, your backpack, and 1 or 2 other things, and a radio. That's it. And you got to be able to carry that. And so what we did, and she'll remember this, is I just practiced carrying her around. And thankfully she's a gymnast at the time, was a great athlete, so she didn't need to train herself. And everywhere I went, I was reminded that I actually couldn't carry that much gear, so I didn't need that much stuff. What was important? Because I could only carry that weight. So figure this out. When I talk about gears, figure out a way to figure out what's important for you to be successful at your project, for your season, for your whatever, and get that gear, and figure out what you can give back or not ask for, because ultimately, and we've learned this at Uber over time, being lean and being efficient is really the only way that the world is headed on so much of this. Okay, number 4. Told you to move through these quickly, there'll be some decent shots along the way. This is actually, remember that shot I showed you of the Everest flag, and I showed you the route. I was at the North Col camp. This is below it. This is called Advanced Base Camp. This is at 21,000 feet, so about 6,000 meters. There's only 1 or 2 places outside the Himalayas that are even as high as where we were standing there. And so it's also spectacular. It's got to be one of the all-time great places to have a camp. That's the ridge right there that I showed you, then you head up into the nothingness. So my 4th point today for your strategy is you've got to figure out who is your guide. And you also may be a guide, because you may be a team leader, you may be a captain, or you may have a captain on your team, but you need to know both directions. It is super important to figure out who the guide is, in this case in the mountains. I would never, ever think about going on these mountains without this guy right here, Panuru Sherpa. Panuru had climbed this mountain 14 times. He knew everything about it. He was the perfect guide. And I would never put my life in jeopardy without following a guide like that. It's a great metaphor for life as you think about spirituality, think about your teams, think about whatever it is. There is a guide out there for you. And on the mountains, it is absolutely no difference. It's true at Uber. There are leaders of the region, there are leaders of the business, and that is super important. And you have to realize as well, as I said, is who actually thinks that you're the guide. You may be a team captain, and there are a whole team of people underneath you that look to you as the guide of that team, or the leader of that club, or whatever it is. And so that sort of differentiation and knowing who is where and trusting that person is super important. I'll give you one more guide picture here. Part of the story I didn't tell you is we were going to attempt to ski Mount Everest on the north side, just to make it a little bit different, unusual. And this is the other guy. This fella's name is Zeb. Zeb's a super cool guy. He's one of the great big mountain skiers in the world. And he was the one that kind of knew what was possible to ski and what wasn't. Because by the way, on all these first lessons I just told you, before we ever got to Mount Everest, we went and tried this on another mountain called Cho'oyo. It was also a 8,000 meter peak. And we did all of this in a dry run form. Come back to that concept as well. But again, a second guide here. So for everything I needed for both the climbing and the skiing, I had 2 people that I trusted and would follow. Well, this is a great picture, by the way. You'll never see this shot. It's the back of Makalu, which is in Nepal. It's the Chinese side of Makalu. And you can only see this from this particular ridge where we were skiing. And I was celebrating a birthday this day. I'll let people guess what birthday it was, and we'll do that later in the show. The 5th lesson, it's really important for your strategy. You all always talk about data and information. You've got more of it at your fingertips than you can ever have now with Google. At Uber, we have more data than almost any company in the world except for people like Facebook and Google. We know so much about moving people in 63 countries around the world. We do billions of trips. So we have a lot of data. I would argue that for your generation, for leadership and strategy, the data is great. The judgment on that data is what matters. So judgment on the data. Because you can look at a whole thing of numbers, you can look at a whole, whatever it is. But if you're not making some calls around it and making judgment around it, and that's what you need. Let me bring it back to the mountain on this lesson 5. Data is great, judgment matters. This is what a really bad day on Mount Everest looks like. This is actually, believe it or not, this is at 23,000 feet above sea level. This is on the north side. I told you it's a little bit windier and colder than not as pretty as the Nepal side. This is Camp 2. It's like the moon. And we had started to move up even early. Remember, we were trying to do this in 30 days. It's going to be a record. And very early in our trip, we thought we had a weather window. So we got a lot of data about weather. We got it from some guys in Switzerland that every day at 4 o'clock sent a satellite transmission to us, all this stuff, and we looked at all the data. I didn't know what I was looking at, but my guide could look at that weather and figure out the wind, the cold, everything, and how you thought about it. So we started moving up the mountain earlier than we thought because there was going to be a window. And on this side of the mountain, you need 4 days of good weather to get to the top from that advanced base camp. So it's not one day, you need to predict 4 days in a row. So there's lots of data, and you don't want to be caught up high with bad weather. So we started moving, and by the way, we started moving, and all of a sudden it looked like 4 days from when we started moving was going to be my birthday. So I'm thinking, man, that is good living. I may actually get on the top of the world on my birthday. And we actually moved for one day, got some data at the end of that day, looked at it, looked okay, but not so great. We moved one more day and we got the data, and the guide I was with looked at that and made a judgment that this has changed dramatically. This looks bad, we got to go down right now. And we turned around, and this is us going back down. And let me tell you, there's few people on the planet at that time more disappointed than this guy right there, which is me, and that's Seb. And we're trying to get down. There's no question the answer was right. The weather was bad. It was changing dramatically. But the disappointment, because remember, I've already been there and failed once. And the way we had trained, which meant that we could really only go up once, and we had about the energy to do that, and to get back down was what you could do, because we were moving faster, remember. We actually gave that data and that judgment to other people that day, and some people chose to follow, and others didn't. And it was tragically, as it turned out, 2 days later, the one day that year where several people were killed on the top because they didn't listen to the weather data. So I'm not making this talk too serious. It's not the point of it today. But sometimes, and it's true at Uber, the data we have and the judgment you make on that data is a matter of great consequence. And that will be the case as you get later in life as well. So how judgments are made, how do you get judgment? It's experience, it's asking around, it's asking your guide, it's looking around, and that's really, really important to think about. So things aren't looking so good. I'm back down, it's my birthday, we're down below, we may be done. And we get one more word from the Swiss, lesson number 6. They say, you know what, you've got one more chance, turns out. It's getting to be late May, you're still within that 1 month. And Everest, by the way, basically always, about June 1st, it's impossible to climb because the monsoon comes and the weather's bad for the whole summer. So you've only got a very narrow window. So we get some news and we turn around and move back up. That is that camp, the North Col camp. The advanced base camp's down there. That's that big ridge that I showed you. Now I want you to kind of think about this lesson. This is the softest of these 8 lessons. Number 6, be present. Be completely focused on what you're doing. And for me in the mountains, I use my faith to always have a devotional. I always start the day with a focused devotional. And that's the way of kind of clearing my mind, making sure that I am as present as possible for the day. Now, for some people, that may be they go and do yoga, and I talk about it at Uber. There's people of all faiths. It's actually whatever your approach to it is, you need to be able to dial in on that for the moment. And I'll tell you why that matters. I don't have a GoPro camera. There's no music in my ears. I don't have a camera here. I am focused on one thing, which is one foot in front of the other. By the way, that's about 8,000 feet down right there, so this all matters. And every bit of time, when you come to what's called an anchor, you have to make a decision to take your anchor off this one and put it back on the other side. And at altitude, when your mind is a little bit silly, that motion is the most important thing you do. And you cannot do that. You have to do it hundreds of times a day. And if you're not present and not focused on your day-to-day, what happens to people, sadly, is they take it off, they look around at the view, try to fix their Walkman or their iPod and kind of crank new tunes, and they forget to go back in here, and then they trip over the other side. So I want you to really think about this as you think about strategy and being a leader, is you got to show up every day and be present. And it doesn't happen that you kind of can get present in the morning and be that way all day. Some people need to go and take a walk around the block. Neural knows it's something I like to do. I just have to get outside between meetings sometimes and go walk over for a coffee. That's how I clear my mind so I can come back and be present. It is very difficult for you to focus for a full day without doing that. So whatever it takes for you to do that, I want you to work that into your thought about leadership and strategy. And again, I told you it's a soft point, but boy, is it important. Okay, we're moving up the mountain. And this is getting towards level 7. This is a pretty cool shot, y'all. This is the highest campground in the world by far. This is Camp 3. That other mountain that we've done the practice run on there is actually right there called Cho'oyo. It's actually the 6th highest mountain in the world. We're actually above it. And that is the sun setting over the Tibetan plain. And there may not be a more beautiful sight than, that I've come across. And some people are ocean people, some people are mountain people. No matter what you are, if you sit here and watch that. And so we're actually, all of a sudden this prediction that there was going to be about 10 hours of good weather on the night of the 26th and early the morning of the 27th of May was looking like we may have had a pretty good judgment. We weren't clear yet. We got in these tents. We got here about 4 in the afternoon. If the last camp was the moon, this is like Mars. There is nothing here, and you can't survive here for more than a couple hours, even if you're on oxygen. You can't stay here for more than one night. So you're just there for about 4 hours to get some things in you and before you head up. So one Uber story here, which is kind of funny because we actually, and Ryan knows this because he actually sent me a message. For all this time, since we left base camp, we had no connection. It's very remote in Tibet. And there's no way to get a signal except when you're all of a sudden you're on that ridge and the Chinese telecom company picks up a signal. And so my phone, when I turned it on because I wanted to make sure it was okay for taking photos, went crazy. And I got the world's highest, to this day, it's the Guinness Book of World Records, highest Uber Eats notification in the history of the world. And it's exactly Friday afternoon, 4:21 on the mountain, which means it was, call it 7 something here. Nepal time is funny time. And it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes behind. That's the Everest mountain time. And it turns out that Brianna, Ashley and Kayla's older sister, and the two, they ordered these burgers, which were my favorite. So getting this message just hurts because I was eating this, which is a chicken fajita bowl, which is freeze-dried. I got my Bronco hat on, and importantly, I don't have an oxygen mask on, and I have no idea why that's the case, which tells you that I was not very on top of my game. So anyway, point is that surprises happen and fun ones happen occasionally. That's the Chinese mobile. So lesson number 7, though, is not about this. It relates to it because you had those 3 hours in the tent. And lesson number 7 is, and I'm going to use tents, and you can plug in any other word to tents. When you get out of the tent, you got to be ready to go. There is no going back in the tent. And that is the same, soccer players in the room, when you go out on that field and you're not going back in the locker room to get something else. You're not going back to get equipment. In this case, when you get out of that tent, when you make the decision to get out of the tent at that camp, you have 1 minute to start moving. And in that 1 minute, you've got to put on what's called crampons, and that enables you to kind of grip the snow. And within 1 minute, your fingers will start freezing. And you can't say, oh man, I forgot my water bottle, and go back in, because first of all, you've got spike as part of your strategy matter. Last point. Okay. That's why I tell you, this is a different kind of talk than most of these kind of rah-rah talks. This actually is a few hours later, and this is at the most famous place on Everest on the Chinese side. It's called the second step. This is a ladder that was put there by the Chinese in 1975. I went up this in the dark, other than the headlamp, and thank goodness, because if I'd seen what we were doing, I would have stopped and gone back, because we heard about it. This is where those guys disappeared in 1924. No one knows what happened to them. Because the only way to get past this part of the mountain from down here on the ridge to the upper ridge is on this one place, and of course there was no ladder in 1924. And we're back to that 11,000 feet one way and 10,000 feet the other way. And there's this really awful joke on Mount Everest that if you have to fall one way, you always fall to the Kangshung face, because it's an extra 1,000 feet to fall. So you technically have a little bit more time. So that's kind of what you have on either side. So let me do a quick talk summary, because this is where this is where you're going to get to in life. And this is why strategy matters when you're a leader, because you're going to come to a point in your life where every single lesson, and in this case, all 8 that I've talked about, matter. Number 1, we've actually taken this new approach, and it's actually, we've moved quickly. Turns out it was the right way to go. There's no crowds around here. You don't see anybody else. We were alone on the mountain. There were a couple other people. We passed one person. No one ever passed us. So it was a new approach to another side of the mountain that made a lot of sense. Second, training mattered. At this point, we've been on the mountain straight for 4 days since advanced base camp. We've been moving for 5 hours, 6 hours that day, and we had about 12 hours to go. So training definitely mattered. Gear, let me tell you something. At this point, very few things matter except that you've got the harness that stays on, your boots that matter, and that backpack and your oxygen's working. At the end of the day, all the rest of the gear doesn't matter. My guide, you better believe they're important. That's Zeb down there, and he actually is kind of saying, you know what, here's what we got to do, this is how we got to get down. Because, by the way, the next one is judgment matters in the data, because it turns out the weather was changing pretty quickly. It was getting bad. We had to move quickly to get down. You can kind of see that in the picture. Number 6, remember I was telling you about being present and making good decisions? Let me tell you something. Every one of these ropes, every year they have a different color rope. These are all for the last many years. Our year was green. In your very strange state mentally, it'd be very easy to say, you know what, I'm going to just clip into the red rope or the striped rope. Except those ropes don't exist anymore. And so I sat there at the top of this thing and had to collect all of my mental faculties and be present and clip into the rope, the right one. So yeah, being present matters. That devotional time or quiet time or yoga time in the morning matters. Did I have everything? Did I get out of the tent with everything? Yeah, because at this point, no matter what you do, you're not going back in. And lesson number 8, and I'll leave it at this, is y'all are going to be super successful in what you do so many times. And whether or not that's a project or a game or anything down the road in life. And I use this one at Uber a lot. You know, we're under a lot of pressure as a company, and we have a lot of wins every day, and teams around the world have heard me say this. But when you have a victory, you celebrate the win, and then you get back to work pretty quickly. And that is what was happening here. That's why it's lesson number 8. I'd already, and this is not even the punchline of the story, which is why I throw it up at the end after the last lesson. We did get to the top. We were super fortunate. That's the top of the world right here. That is our team. We're the only people there. It is, this is Nepal, this is China, and there's that Everest flag I talked about. That's a bare hand. I don't know why I don't have a glove on. It's another mystery question. I was pretty focused on the selfie or the shot. But the reality was we were on top for less than 20 minutes. A lifetime of training and wanting to be there. And we called our doctor, Dr. Monica. I had to call it and said, we're on the summit. She said, congratulations. How many people are with you? I had to count out loud. She was testing to see how I was mentally. She said, fantastic, take your pictures. I want you moving in 15 minutes. A lifetime goal. And within that time, we had to be on our way down because we were facing that. So last point, and I just ran through all of it, but again, Celebrate wins. You win that game, celebrate, and you know what you do the next morning, you go back in, you watch film, you think about who the next game's about. And that's true in anything you do. So 8 lessons, strategy and leadership, and thanks for listening. I'll leave it at that.